Right now, as you're listening to this, there are approximately 117 million Americans in active facial recognition databases. That's 1 in 3 people in the US. Your face, scraped from social media, DMV records, even grocery store loyalty programs, is sitting in a server room somewhere waiting to be matched against a grainy security camera photo. And here's what nobody really told you. These systems don't need to be right, they just need to be confident. In January 2020, Robert Williams was loading groceries into his car when Detroit police surrounded him. His 5-year-old daughter watched from the back seat as they cuffed her father. The charge was stealing $38,000 worth of watches from a Shinola store. The evidence? A facial recognition system that matched his expired driver's license photo to a blurry figure on some security footage. Williams had never been to that store. He was at work when the theft actually occurred, but the algorithm was 89% confident it was him. And in 2024, that's apparently enough to destroy someone's life. This isn't science fiction. This was a Tuesday afternoon in America. Welcome to the Human Update. We're diving into the invisible surveillance state that is already judging you.
All right, so you're going to have to walk me through exactly how someone can literally end up in handcuffs because of a computer program that they've never heard of. How does that happen?
Well, I mean, there's really like 3 different layers to it, okay? So the first layer is data collection. There's companies like Clearview AI, for example, they've scraped over 30 billion photos from Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, even Venmo. All right. So they're building what they're calling the Google of faces without consent. So second is deployment. Over 600 police departments use facial recognition right now. Like major retailers run it in real time. But there's no federal requirement to tell you, a consumer or just a public person, that this facial recognition is even happening, that any of these departments are even doing this. So, like, for these algorithms, basically anything above a 70% confidence match will trigger an action by the authorities. But the score isn't based on accuracy, it's based on pattern matching. So if you match the pattern that they have within the algorithm, you could be detained.
Oh my gosh. You're saying that this is already in place and operational. This system is already making decisions about people, but it operates in the background and it is currently happening.
Exactly. Like there's a feedback loop that nobody's really talking about. Okay. So once you're wrongfully flagged in the system, your photo gets added to the gallery and it's basically like a digital lineup. So for every future scan that happens, it compares suspects against this gallery. So you've now become a permanent suspect in the digital gallery.
What does a permanent suspect consist of and what does it actually mean in practical terms?
So the NYPD ran 22,000 facial recognition searches in 2019 alone. So you can imagine how those numbers have ballooned in the last couple of years. They've made identifications from photos as small as 32 pixels, okay? In real terms, that's smaller than a postage stamp. So once you're in the system, every crime that happens near a camera or anything that's within their system could potentially trigger you as a potential suspect indefinitely.
How accurate are they in real world conditions versus lab simulations or conditions?
That's a good question, man. I think, so the FBI tests show error rates between like 0.08% and they're saying that they're 99.65% basically perfect, okay? In these systems, like these systems are quote unquote perfect. Now, those stats were gathered in a lab, okay? So MIT basically took these exact same systems, and what they found out after they tested them in the real world is they found out that it misidentified dark-skinned women 35% of the time while achieving 99% accuracy for light-skinned men. Okay, so one great example of Amazon had a product called facial recognition, which falsely matched 28 members of Congress to criminal mugshots that weren't their own.
My gosh. So this is obviously biased, operating, well, it's like operating without oversight, making these life-altering decisions. What's the scale of people that are already affected by this?
So this is the insane part. Georgetown Law found that 117 million Americans, which is a little less than half the population, are already in law enforcement databases. Okay, so that's, and then this is the kicker, 87% of those people have never even been arrested. So the system isn't tracking known criminals, it's tracking everyone, all right? And we're just starting to see these issues emerge and play out in the public sphere in the last couple of years.
That's scary because I've obviously heard about criminals being detained based on mugshots or previous data circulating the police system. The first thing I'm sure a police officer does is check your ID to see if you're in the system, but now you're talking about it on a completely general scale. So like
Absolutely.
these especially the misidentifications, how are they actually ruining people's lives? Like what does the human cost look like in concrete terms? How are people being affected by this?
Yeah, so I mean, take the example that we have. Robert Williams wasn't just arrested, he was basically like psychologically branded by all of this. After 30 hours in jail, the Detroit police released him, and they basically told him, look, the computer says it's you, but the computer could be wrong. Okay, so they knew the system was fallible. They arrested him anyway, and they only admitted uncertainty after destroying his family's sense of security. So like his daughter still asks him, like, is her father going to be taken away in handcuffs? So the settlement didn't cover like their bills, their anxiety medications, like the fact that their neighbors look at them differently. Like none of that mattered to the police that were leading them away, and none of that mattered to the system. Like the algorithm didn't just misidentify his face, it basically now branded him as a criminal within his own community indefinitely.
So they're actually like they're making technical errors, but they're still deploying people who understand the limitations of this, but they proceed anyway. Like it doesn't make a difference if there's a technical error.
No, I mean, if you take a look at another example, right? There's another person named Portia Woodrow. So she was 8 months pregnant when the Detroit police arrested her for carjacking. The system matched her to a photo in January. But here's the kicker. She was in the hospital giving birth on that day. So medical records, witnesses, proof that she was actually in labor during this time didn't matter. Okay? The detective's response when confronted with the evidence was, well, the computer doesn't lie. Okay? But the problem is that computers do lie when they don't understand what they're looking at. So in Woodruff's case, the case basically reveals that the system isn't just like flawed, it's being used as a shortcut to avoid actual police work. All right, so it generates suspects first and then it justifies the arrests later.
That just seems like a complete inversion of the criminal justice system, like guilt by algorithm until proven innocent by human evidence. But what happens when these systems scale beyond individual arrests? Can it get to a bigger level of criminal investigation for innocent people?
Here's the really scary part. In just last year in New Orleans, some reporters in New Orleans basically discovered that New Orleans had deployed over 200 facial recognition cameras without public disclosure. Okay, so not scanning criminals, it's scanning everyone, school kids, tourists, workers. 15,000 alerts happened within a 6-month period of time. 34 arrests happened. And the most terrifying part was that the city council didn't even know that the system existed. So Palantir, which is one of a larger American defense contractor, basically at this point, they installed the cameras through a pilot program that became like a permanent surveillance. So when confronted, the officials claimed that this was an enhanced video monitoring system, but it had already been rolled out throughout the city. Okay, this wasn't just a pilot program, this was a rollout program. So this is how the surveillance states are born. It's not through announcements, but it's through quiet deployments that normalize this very abnormal thing, this abnormal surveillance state.
And beyond government surveillance, how are private companies, like you mentioned briefly, using these systems? And what are the implications for people who are just trying to live their daily lives? What is the effect? on them.
Yeah, this gets even, I think this is a little bit more worrying to me because now you have private companies that are utilizing this data. So major retailers have built a surveillance system without any kind of like constitutional protection. So think of Macy's, Target, Walmart. They all share data through the Retail Crime Intelligence Platform. So if you're flagged at Target in Texas, every participating store knows your face within just a couple of hours of this happening. There's no appeals, there's no corrections, no expiration date from when you get out of hock, basically. Like, okay, I'll give you an example. So there's a 63-year-old man that discovered this when he was arrested for allegedly stealing from Macy's in New York, all right, while being in Florida at the time. The system flagged him on a previous false positive that followed up with him across all the different state lines. So while he was in jail, he was beaten and sexually assaulted. All right. And his $10 million lawsuit is not going to basically undo what happened to him from a computer algorithm that chose to say that he was the one in New York City that was stealing from Macy's at the time.
Well, there's no way to undo that. No way. But you're also talking about adults who theoretically understand and potentially challenge these systems. But what about children? What happens if they're deployed against children who have less agency in this situation?
Yeah, the children issue is a real, I mean, that's a heart wrencher for me because they don't really understand what's happening with all these systems. So there's an example with Lockport schools in New York can scan students as young as 5, and they can flag people of interest, including former students who were disciplined, but not yet criminals. So a 7th grader was pulled from his class because the system matched him to his suspended older brother from 3 years ago. So false positives lead police questioning, they lead to police questioning, searches, suspension, because an algorithm can't tell the difference between siblings, all right, and especially kids that are growing. So students report feeling like criminals in their own school, and basically we're conditioning them to live under and accept a surveillance lifestyle, something where it's very authoritarian and the computers have the control within their space.
Yeah, that's scary. And what you're saying is that these technologies are admittedly flawed, number one, and then I assume in the future, however, they will advance. And as a result, do you think these technologies will grow their use cases as well?
So let's talk about China, for example. So this gets really weird for me because China does this automatically to their citizens. But this is not something that we allow in America. But China's systems don't just identify faces, they predict behavior. So they assign trust scores to each citizen. So that technology is quietly entering America through companies like Hikvision and Dahua. And Dahua is spelled Dahua, in case you want to go out and look it up after this. These companies are sanctioned by the United States, but they're still providing cameras through their distributors to customers in the United States. So the evolution of behavior prediction is basically these systems aren't going to ask like, who is that person, but rather what is that person about to do? So things like early versions of like micro expressions in airports and schools that could predict aggression, but these micro aggressions or micro expressions are basically different from person to person and culture to culture. So it's incredibly difficult to tell the difference depending upon the person or the subject at hand. It's really difficult to do that. So imagine like an arrest, not for what you did, but for what the algorithm thinks that you might do. Okay. Yeah. And the crazy part is the technology exists to catch these quote unquote microaggressions, but the legal frameworks have not caught up. There's no constitutional protections yet for any of this stuff. It's kind of getting to the point like that movie Minority Report in a way.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was picturing. I forgot what the name of those things are called. I think they're called precogs or something.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool, and they give out predictions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the exact image that popped in my head. So where does this trajectory lead if current patterns continue without any intervention? Where do you think it'll go?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're witnessing some more authoritarian movement that's rising pretty quickly. right? You don't start to go and look over your citizens' shoulders without there being some kind of motivation behind it. Now, I'm not saying that the United States government is authoritarian by any means, but I am saying that there are things that are being put into place so that if somebody wanted to become more authoritarian, it would be a little bit easier. By 2030, facial recognition will be pretty much near perfect. Okay. But today's infrastructure still remains kind of flawed. Obviously, you're seeing some of these false arrests and detainments. So every person carries a permanent digital signature across any camera network. Like your face becomes your ID card, essentially. And the question isn't whether the technology will be perfect, it's whether we'll retain rights to anonymity, rights to make mistakes, and the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law of humans. Like in Robert Williams' case, it wasn't a fluke. It was the system working as intended. So we need to start acting now, or his story kind of becomes a preview into what our future could potentially be.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah, we do have to look into it. And also, I imagine the legal frameworks should be looked into as well. Like, what actual protections do people have when they are targeted by these systems?
So as I was going through and doing a little bit more of the research on this episode, what shocked me most was that the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches, but courts have yet to decide if scanning your face in public constitutes a search. So the Fourth Amendment protects you in cases where a police officer pulls you over. You can basically say, look, you don't have the right to search through my vehicle unless you have an obtained warrant. You can't search my house. It's an illegal search and seizure. But the Fourth Amendment, again, we haven't decided whether if you're walking around in public, does that mean that it's an unconstitutional search if your face is in a national database? We haven't contemplated these things yet. So there's no federal law that is regulating facial recognition by use in police right now as it stands. So most people don't even know that they have the right to ask how they were identified if they are attained or are detained by police.
And I assume that means there are no technical verification processes built in. Like, are there supposed to be human checks built into these systems where they're verifying each situation?
Yeah, in theory, yeah. Like most departments claim that like human officers are verifying AI matches, but verification just often means a police officer glancing at two photos and saying, yeah, it kind of looks close enough, right? So like Detroit's policy requires 3 different angles for confirmation now after the Williams arrest. So because he was arrested off of just one blurry image. So the human verification point at this time, a lot of times it's just kind of like performative theater rather than like real actual police work.
But how are the companies responding to failures? I imagine, based on what you said, there must have been lawsuits that have already happened because of these incorrect arrests, for example.
Yeah. So like Clearview AI claims that their system is 99.6% accurate, but they won't reveal their testing methodology. Okay. Again, it's in the lab. So if it's in the lab, it's perfect. But once this stuff gets deployed, like what happens there? So like when they're pressed about false arrests and they say their technology is investigative, not determinative. Basically what they're saying is they're like, look, we sell you the tool to all of the police departments, but we don't claim responsibility for how said tool is used. So it's kind of like cigarette companies, right? They're basically going to say, we're not necessarily responsible if somebody uses our product and develops lung cancer.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And what about the economic incentives? Like how much money you think is driving this expansion, if any?
You got to go look back at the financials in every instance. So the facial recognition market is projected to hit $13 billion by 2018. So Clearview AI raised $30 million despite ongoing lawsuits. Palantir's government contracts have ballooned to over $5 billion in just the United States alone, and Palantir contracts with a lot of different government organizations around the world. So there's massive money in surveillance and virtually no financial penalty for getting it wrong. So you can just be wrong, your algorithm can be incorrect, and you can still profit from this.
And are there any examples of like successful pushbacks against these systems that demonstrate change is actually possible?
Absolutely. So Amazon stopped selling their product Recognition to police after employees protested and customers boycott Amazon. IBM essentially exited all of facial recognition entirely, and Microsoft limited the availability of some of their facial recognition products when similar things happened to them. Okay, so San Francisco, Boston, Portland all banned the government use of these kinds of products in facial recognition. The EU regulations now require explicit consent for any biometric processing of data. So changes can happen when the public puts pressure on a lot of these companies.
I see what you mean. What do you think the most important thing is that people are misunderstanding about how these systems actually work?
People think these AI systems are infallible. They think it works kind of like CSI, like a perfect match and perfect identification. In reality, like this stuff is just pattern matching with confidence scores, and those confidence scores aren't necessarily based on a lot of things. Like the system converts faces into math, essentially. So eye spacing, nose width, jaw curves. A 90% confidence score means 90% mathematically similar, not 90% accuracy. But faces change, lighting changes, and angles distort everything within photos. So in Robert Williams's arrest, 98% confidence comparing to a clear 2016 DMV photo to a grainy 2020 security camera image. Like the guy gained weight, he grew facial hair, and he looked completely different. To humans, the two photos looked nothing alike, but mathematically, the eye distance was similar enough to whoever perpetrated this crime to where the security apparatus and the AI system thought they were the same. It's kind of like if you ask a computer if two songs sound exactly the same based off of the length of the song. So the math might match, but you're measuring the wrong thing. Like everything, like every false arrest happens with high confidence scores. The algorithm worked as it's designed, measuring patterns while everybody else assumes it was identifying the faces. It just matched the patterns was all.
Wow. That's scary, and that seems like there's lots of room for error. So in that case, as we talk about on the show always, how can people protect themselves against this and these systems, given everything we've talked about?
So basically, immediate self-defense is one of the things that you can do, community advocacy, and then systematic change. For immediate protection, like know your rights. So if you're detained, ask what evidence led to my identification. So that needs to be asked up front. Okay. So if facial recognition was involved, document everything: badge numbers, printouts, body cam footage request, Freedom of Information Act. Like you got to gather all of this stuff. So most people don't know that facial recognition matches must be verified by humans. But verification is often just performative, as we've discussed. So start building your case immediately when that happens.
I see. Okay. Well, that's sounds like good advice. And what about overall prevention? People limiting their exposure to these systems. Is that possible at all? And if so, how can we do that?
So you can't completely avoid this stuff. It's impossible because there's too many cameras out in public. So you can't necessarily limit your exposure there. But what you can do is audit your digital footprint. So if you search for yourself on something called Prim Eyes, primeyes.com, go on there, and other reverse image searches. You can actually find these websites that allow you to go in and search where your photos have been posted and some of the companies that contain your visual data. And then enable the strongest social media privacy settings, remove tagged photos of you. Facebook's facial recognition scanned billions of photos even after they claimed it was shut down. So when shopping, avoid the loyalty programs that require photo IDs that can match your name and other biometric information together. That's a really big one.
Okay. Yeah, you won't see me getting a Marshall's card anytime soon in that case.
Yeah, exactly.
How can people find out if their local government is already using these systems when most departments obviously don't volunteer the information? Is there a way that people can actually inquire to their local government?
Good question. You can file Freedom of Information Act requests. So you can ask specifically about facial recognition technology, biometric identification systems, and video analytics software. So you can ask governments, be they county or city governments, state governments, and then federal governments. They all pretty much have to tell you what's going on there. So you can check city budgets for contracts with companies like Clearview AI, Vigilant Solutions, and Amazon Recognition. So look for public safety technology line items within that. A lot of times that's where most people get caught, or these organizations get caught within the financial line items. Within financial reports that they have to disclose. So people will attend city council meetings with direct questions. In New Orleans, citizens only discovered about the surveillance network through persistent public questioning. So it was a discovery process for them where they constantly badgered public officials. And again, the city council had no idea that this was going on.
Wow. And are policy changes possible at that local level? Are they achievable for these people who are trying to, defend their rights or at least gain information? Do you think the local level would allow for a policy change?
Yeah, I mean, look, municipal bans work. Look at San Francisco, Boston, Portland, Minneapolis. Like, a lot of these governments banned the use of this entirely only after public backlash. So we as citizens really do need to push back, and we need to push for algorithmic accountability ordinances, because the problem is these organizations are just going to roll out this stuff if there is no public backlash. It's a lot easier to have AI systems do law enforcement work than to have people actually go through and do real police work. And in a lot of instances, what we need to start doing is treating a lot of these facial recognition systems a lot more like wiretaps instead of just security cameras. Because with wiretaps, you have to go in and you have to get warrants to be able to utilize them. So if somebody's really motivated from a police standpoint, they will go and they will get those warrants to be able to utilize this technology. But the carte blanche use of this is basically creating a surveillance state.
Wow. That's pretty scary, and it sounds like a lot for just your average civilian to have to go through. But hopefully changes can be made on a more broader or systemic level. What do you think the most effective path is to that area of change as opposed to the local level?
Yeah. Look, economic pressure works, right? And it's faster than legislation. So shareholders were pressured in facial recognition companies to exit certain programs. So Amazon, IBM, Microsoft all changed their policies due to public pressure. So, but if you support strategic, a lot of these strategic lawsuits that are happening where there's class action lawsuits, every successful case of this that happens will create a precedent. So, for example, the Williams settlement led to Detroit's new restrictions where now they have to use at least 3 pictures. There are other restrictions that they have to put in place. So filing complaints with civil, state rights commissions, the FBI Civil Rights Division, go public with your story if this type of thing happens to you. The thing is that these things can perpetuate in the shadows, but once we shine a light on it, things start to change. And so we do need to start calling that out. And I think the biggest thing is make other people aware of these systems. That's what we're trying to do here, is telling you, look, these systems are in place. They're in public. They're in your daily lives right now. So you can go about and change these systems. You can do something about it. You do have the power to do it. It's just whether we as citizens act on that.
I see. And so what is the correct mode of action if people discover they've been misidentified or wrongly surveilled? What do you think the first thing is someone should do?
Act immediately. Get copies of all the reports, booking photos, evidence, request body cam footage. And you have to do this quickly because a lot of the police departments are going to delete this after 30 days. So you have to contact civil rights attorneys that specialize in surveillance cases. Those are going to lead to real change. But again, make sure that you get an attorney that specializes in surveillance cases specifically. A lot of people don't realize that there is a specialization, but there is. So file complaints with state commissions, federal civil rights divisions. Most importantly, again, go public, right? And talk about it.
Okay, good to know. Well, we've talked about how the technology kind of works, its failures, what the human cost is, and then, of course, potential solutions, which is great. What do you think, in a more general, existential question, what's the fundamental choice that we're facing as a society right now? What is the main decision or crossroads we're coming to as a society, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a societal standpoint, we have to decide whether we want to live under this kind of social architecture. Do we really want to live under a more surveillance state or not? I think we have to really make that decision as a public, and I think we need to open up the dialogues that are there. I think we as human beings, we get complacent if we are not generally affected or somebody that we love is not generally affected yet by this technology. The problem that I have is that this technology exists, and for the wrong person who comes into power, they can come in, flip a switch, and now all of a sudden it's you they're coming after. And it might not necessarily be you immediately, but it could be your friends and family. So we have to decide, do we want this architecture to exist at all at this time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for people that are listening that might think it doesn't apply to them, or that this is a distant problem, or they don't have relatives that can be affected by this, what would you say to those people?
There's already 117 million Americans that are listed in one system alone. Now, when you take a look at all of that data that exists, you're not a criminal. You should not be in this system at all, but you likely are in the system. If you have a social media profile, you likely are already in the system. So this isn't something that could potentially happen. It's already starting to happen. And so it's up to you as the public to decide what you want to do with it and where you want to go with this. And we need to start having these discussions. We need to start discovering which municipalities have rolled this out in either a pilot program or full-on rollout program, and we need to start having conversations and pushing back, because I guarantee you it wasn't the citizens that put this in place or asked for this kind of thing to happen to them.
Yeah, definitely not. So what gives you hope that we actually can change course for the better?
Look, it's individual wins build up into a wave. So every city that's banned these systems, every lawsuit that's won, every person who stood up and said, like, this thing's wrong, they're providing something for the future for us to basically build on. They're building that momentum. And so all the little wins that happen, that gives me hope that we'll say, wait a minute, this technology is pushing a little too far into our lives. Like, there is something that requires privacy between personal space and the state. And so the state can only have access to so much of my private information. And we were built in the United States on a government that wanted to limit government access to your personal life. And I do think we need to take that a lot more serious in the future.
Yeah, I think so too. What do you think a final thought would be for our listeners based on this topic, as I'm sure people's minds are spinning around at this point?
You have a lot more power than you think you do. You can go out and you can change economically the course and the direction of many different companies that are employing this kind of technology. You can change the direction, the political direction within your state, within your city, and within your country. And it's up to you to call these things out and make these changes. So go out there. Like, the choice is still ours. We haven't built this infrastructure to tamp down on people just yet everywhere, but we can start to eliminate and roll back some of these advances into our private lives.
Great. I think the optimism is truly empowering. So I want to thank you for adding that. And I think that's it for now, but I look forward to next time that we can continue chatting about this. And yeah, that's it for the Human Update. If you're shocked, that means you're in the discussion and you're paying attention. So feel free to share this with anyone who thinks that ChatGPT is still just for emailing and summarization. And as always, stay different, stay weird, stay human out there.